Welcome back to Switchstars, my name's Luke, and today on the channel we're taking a look at an interesting little indie title called Mage and Monsters, an auto battler which has you battling your way through waves of enemies as you amass an army of troops and cast spells to decimate your opponents and keep your own forces alive. It's a part of a Steam game, but the question is it any good? Well, drop a like, subscribe for more Switch reviews and content, and let's find out. Now, getting right into the gameplay, as there's no story with this one, Mage and Monsters features progression mechanics somewhat similar to Vampire Survivors, as it's all about repeatedly attempting runs to earn currency and unlock new characters and upgrades, and I'll get onto these shortly, but the gameplay itself is very different indeed. Upon starting a new run though, you'll first be given a selection of characters to play as, and each of these start with a unique perk and a level 1 spell, or forego the spells entirely and start with additional troops and perks, but these include things like additional cooldown, additional damage with fire or ice spells, or bonuses to certain troop types. Next, you select your arena, and the game has only 2 arenas unfortunately, with a second unlocked after successfully completing the first, but these determine the types of enemies you'll face in each wave. Finally, you get to select your starting troops, with either ranged or melee options on offer, and a small amount of gold to get you started. Now, each playthrough of the game consists of 30 waves in total, each of which pits you against a different lineup of enemies, but these are not randomised and you'll always face the same sets of enemies in each wave. So in this regard, the game does lose a little in the way of replayability, but it also lets you hone your skills and try out different army configurations and spells to see what works best. As a wave commences though, your troops will spawn on the right whilst enemy troops will spawn from the left, and the two will generally meet up somewhere around the middle to duke it out. But being an auto battler, you have no direct control over the battle, and so you must influence it by casting various spells to either damage the enemy or buff and heal your own troops. Spells are cast by aiming your on-screen cursor and cycling through them with the L and R buttons before triggering them, and generally this works quite well. However, you do need to be strategic about where and when you cast them, as damaging spells usually have an area of effect and will deal damage to units from both armies, and I found it particularly difficult to target and buff individual targets, especially in the later game where the hundreds of on-screen troops cause the frame rate to drop drastically, making even casting your damaging spells accurately a bit of a nightmare. Anyway, your ranged troops stay safely behind your melee ones, and the same goes for the enemy's troops, and the remaining army of course emerges victorious. If you fail, it's game over, but if you succeed you're rewarded with some additional gold and a selection of upgrades which can either be additional units or spells or a straight up injection of gold. But after picking one of these you're then taken to the shop to prepare before the next wave commences, and all of your troops are restored between waves. Now, this shop is where you'll spend your accumulated gold, and the upgrades here include expansions to your max army size, another random selection of units or spells, or the option to unlock the next tier of spells and units. But the key thing to note here is that most units have unique perks or abilities, and once you upgrade your unit tier, the previous tier of units will no longer appear in the upgrade options, so some strategical decisions need to be made before you do this. Additional options in the shop include increases to the damage of your ranged and melee units, additional troops and options from the upgrades menu, or additional damage or cooldown for your spells. And all in all, the variety here is a little limited, but at least it felt like they had a significant impact on your army and that your decisions on how to spend your limited amount of gold mattered. And it's worth noting that leaving gold unspent will reward you with bonus gold at the end of waves once certain thresholds are reached. So that is the gameplay loop in this one, but how does it all stack up and is it any fun? Well, I haven't really played many auto battlers throughout my time gaming, but I have to say Mage and Monsters is actually quite enjoyable. I tried numerous builds throughout my playtime to varying degrees of success, and I found that you can't really solely rely on units or spells alone, and so must utilise both to have the best chance of success. Like I said, the tier system also adds additional elements of strategy, with earlier tiers of troops no longer available once you upgrade, but units increasing both power and cost, and so there's always that balancing act to be had between lower level cannon fodder and higher level specialist troops. The whole gameplay loop though is pretty enjoyable in my opinion, and it's an easy one to just pick up and play, although I will say that I didn't find it to be overly challenging aside from the odd difficulty spike with certain enemy lineups and the final 5-wave gauntlet of enemies which comes after wave 30 and doesn't allow for any shock breaks. So finally getting back to those upgrades then, successfully completing the first arena stage unlocks the forest as well as brutal difficulty, which increases enemy health and damage by 50%, but also rewards you with 60% more blood shards, the currency required for the permanent upgrades and unlocks. Once again, these upgrades are a little limited, granting extra troops when starting out, additional health, damage and range to units, bonus gold or extra spell damage and cooldown, and there are also a couple of new units and spells to unlock, or alternatively they can be spent on unlocking new characters. But the impact that these things have on gameplay appear to be minimal, and the upgrades themselves are pretty expensive, which with you only earning 100 or so blood shards for a full run means that unlocking all of them will take a very long time. Overall though, the gameplay itself is pretty decent and the asking price is very reasonable for the content on offer. Its replayability is hindered by the lack of variety, both in terms of the general gameplay loop and the quantity of unlocks on offer. But it's a great game to play in short bursts and would work really well as a time filler game on those short journeys, or something to just dive in and out of when you're not in the mood for anything more complicated. So both the visuals and audio in this one are kept pretty minimal, and again, much like Vampire Survivors, they've gone for that classic pixel art style with simple static backgrounds and sprite based characters, and these all look pretty decent, though there is some mismatching between the character artwork and the high definition spell artwork, all of which I assume are sourced from store-bought assets. The same can be said of the audio, some simple tunes to play along to and some decent sound effects to go alongside the gameplay. Nothing overly original, but all in all, pretty decent stuff. Like I said though, the game does start to struggle in terms of its performance, especially in the latter stages when there are hundreds of sprites on screen, which really impacts on your ability to target your spells accurately, but overall it's not too bad. So in conclusion then, Mage and Monsters is a fun little auto battler and generally just a well put together time filler title, whose gameplay is easy to pick up and offers a reasonable level of challenge at higher difficulties, requiring strategical decisions from the player and offering impactful choices when it comes to its unit types and upgrades. It is however a little lacking in terms of its replayability due to the predefined enemy lineups and the limited amount of upgrades on offer, meaning that you're not going to be getting the same amount of hours out of it compared with something like Vampire Survivors, and the performance issues do become a real hindrance in the latter portion of the game, but it's fun while it lasts and reasonably cheap, and so today on the channel I'm going to be giving Mage and Monsters 3 out of 5 stars. All in all, an enjoyable little time filler title, and one which I hope sees new content added at some point in the near future. With that said though, that just about does it for this review of Mage and Monsters, so let me know what you thought about this one, and if you happen to have picked it up and played it already, let me know how you found it. For now though, drop a like and subscribe for more Switch content and reviews, and until next time, take care of yourselves and game on.